Matty Lansdown, welcome to the podcast. How are we doing?
Good, man. Appreciate the invite and keen to get into whatever evolves in this conversation.
Yeah, brilliant. Just want to say, I feel like you're doing really important work because the food space and the relationships around food is an extremely important thing that we are not dealing with very effectively. And I feel like everything is working against us. So to be able to have people that work in this space and provide positive frameworks to fix it and work towards it, I highly respect. And it's something that I personally struggle with on a regular basis. So I'm really looking forward to just chatting with you about what you know and some personal anecdotes and, some ideas around what I can even do. And I think in the process of understanding what I can do, I might be able to help others as well.
Yeah. Thanks, man. That's some really kind words. And it's a tricky space to work in because unlike heroin and unlike alcohol, we need food. And so, it's a really challenging space because to be addicted to food or to be addicted to chocolate or to be addicted to sugar is confusing for a lot of people because we can't stop eating. You can stop heroin, you can stop drinking, you can stop smoking, but you can't stop eating.
Definitely. It's a necessity that can also be a challenge. So I feel like it creates, quite a bit of confusion, and that confusion doesn't help by the way that the world is currently bidding against you with high fructose corn syrup and all of these other crazy, crazy things that they put into food, especially in the US. This place is wild.
Yeah, the US is so much more worse than almost any country that I've ever been to. But sadly, statistically, Australia is not very far behind at all in regards to obesity and diabetes and dementia. And so, we're just a stone's throw behind the US, which is not a race that you want to win.
Not at all. So to get started, Hippocrates was once rumored to say, let food be thy medicine and medicine be thy food around 400 BC. Yet everywhere we look now, we're overweight, we're sick, there's chronic diseases, and a lot of it has to do with what we eat in society and the fact that it kind of sucks. So from your understanding, where did we go so wrong?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I think the answer lies in, it's a multi-pronged answer. The answer lies firstly in sort of just capitalist ideas and realizing that you can sell more of a product if people want more of it. So then the question is, how do you make your product, and the word that is used in business is sticky? Like, how do you make a product or a program or a food sticky and what that means is that it's hard to get away from, right? So what was discovered was that if you reduce the protein, sometimes you take out a bit of the fat, add in more salt, more sugar, that people wanted to come back for more. And so there's that one argument about where we got it wrong, was that, maybe governments got it wrong by not regulating that industry, but equally they got paid lots of money through tax and through various, avenues for that to be true. Then I guess the other place that we get it wrong that isn't talked about very often is that the world needed to be fed after World War II. And so the world was massively, impoverished in many, many places, and we needed to rebuild the world. And the way that was done was grains, and carbohydrates that were fast growing, that the governments could just sort of, pour these grains into people's diets and lifestyles and make them cheap and subsidize those farmers so that we could get food into populations all around the world. And that might have been a great idea for 10 years, maybe 15 years after a world war. But beyond that, then we've got the world covered in these farms and these deals with these governments that then become these legacy commitments and agreements that have just been around ever since, right? And as a consequence of that, we now live in this carbohydrate-dominant world of bread, of croissants, of bagels, all of those kinds of things, which again are missing the protein. Often, sort of added in is sugar and sweeteners and flavors and colors, all of these things which are unnatural. And so over the last sort of 70 to 100 years, we've progressively moved away from what real food is. And so now we've got what we call food-like substances, which is most of the stuff you'll buy in a supermarket.
That makes sense. So I wonder, one thing that popped out in my mind is I follow quite a lot of different, health content creators and stuff. And a lot of, initially, gluten was vilified, and then you hear somebody say, oh, I think it's American processing of gluten versus, Europe having a much softer impact on your gut. And then I read somewhere that sourdough is actually good for you if done with like 4 items. So what's going on in that bread space with wheat and gluten?
Yeah, so a lot of people have reactions to gluten all over the world. There was a study done a few years ago where they tested 8,000 people and their reaction to wheat, and they found that 8% of those people had an obvious immune reaction. So that what I mean by that is that they knew something was wrong. They could feel like they were inflamed, or they had some gut pain, or they had diarrhea, whatever it was. And then there was obviously the remainder. They weren't physically aware that they were experiencing any symptoms, but of that remaining group of people, so that remaining 92%, of that 92, there was 88% of people that still had an immune response, but they weren't consciously aware of it. So it kind of puts up the argument that maybe most people have an immune response or a reaction to gluten, whether you know about it or not, or to wheat, because there's multiple molecules that you could be reacting to. But the argument between Europe and the US, or Europe and Australia, and I see this a lot, working with clients that have got issues with wheat, is that they go to Greece, or they go to Italy, or they go to France, and they eat pasta, or they eat a croissant, and they have no issues or no visible or physical experiences that they're consciously aware of. And the idea, I guess, behind what's going on there is that in the Western countries, two things: the laws in regards to what you can do to crops and genetically modification and stuff like that, it's much stricter in the EU, and the EU sort of lead the world in regards to their food regulations, their advertising regulations, what you can and can't say about what is in a food. Whereas the US is obviously the other end of the spectrum, which is like, do anything you can to sell this product effectively. And so what that means is that the crops in the US market and the Australian market and many of the other Western markets in the world, those crops are more genetically modified. They're further from what the original crop was. And the other thing that I think, and maybe this isn't totally scientifically founded, but my thought is that if we go back 10,000 years or 50,000 years, wheat was around, bread was around, but we relied on seasonal crops to be able to produce those outcomes. We didn't have grains for breakfast, grains for lunch, grains for dinner, the muffin and morning tea, the snack in the afternoon, supper. We didn't necessarily eat grains, 2 to 10 times a day, whereas we do that now. There are grains in everything in a bag, a box, or a can. There is some kind of grain, wheat, gluten molecule in there. And so I think 10,000 years ago, because a lot of people argue that, hey, bread's been around for a long time, and it has, but it was cooked, it was valuable resource, if you could buy it, and so everybody got a little bit, but it wasn't all the time, it wasn't every day, plus there wasn't the genetic modification that there is now, plus there wasn't the pesticides and herbicides that we also consume. So I think, if we go back in time, we realize that, hey, maybe there was like 3 to 6 months of the year that somebody didn't eat a gluten molecule or a wheat molecule at all, so the system had time to recover, if you know what I mean, or be able to, process that in a different way, or, just not have a reaction or an immune response. Or even if they did, they knew that it wasn't going to be long until wheat wasn't around anymore. So there's some of my thoughts on, why there's a difference between the way we react to grains and wheat and gluten in the US versus Europe.
So with that in mind, from what you understand, are there positive health benefits to a simple sourdough in a diet with, stripping away the potential inflammation response? Is there a net positive still?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think some people would have a net positive. I mean, sourdough is good because you've got fermentation as part of the process, which is helpful for our bodies. But I think generally that most people can get their carbohydrates, from vegetables. A lot of people sort of don't realize. I often hear people say there's four new bits of nutrition. There's fats, protein, carbohydrates, and vegetables. And vegetables are almost exclusively carbohydrates. So I'm pretty confident that most people can get what they need from whole, real food, from vegetables. Does that mean I'm against bread? No. Does that mean I think everybody should avoid wheat? No. There's practicalities, and it takes time to change, what you buy at the supermarket in your routine diet. But yeah, is there a net positive? I would say possibly, but you can do better with whole, real food.
So what would be better? What's an example?
Yeah, so if we're looking at carbohydrates, then the things that would be better would definitely be, if we go into the root vegetables, so similar kind of complex carbohydrate idea or energy intake. So, your potatoes, sweet potatoes, and then you just sort of include everything on that, taro, jicama, and then we go to broccoli and, above and below ground vegetables. All of them include healthy carbohydrates. But if we're comparing something to bread, then I would be going towards more the below ground vegetables, so your root vegetables, because they're going to be a bit denser, a bit more complex carbohydrate, and give you that same kind of energy that bread might have.
Yeah, that makes sense. I don't get much energy from food. That I get tired after most of my meals, and I think that's a problem. I am not too sure what's going on there.
Well, maybe because the thing is, like, your body, it's doing a major task, and if you think about it like this, gums to bum, right, of your body. When you eat, that entire system, gums to bum, has been engaged, which if you look at your physical body, that's a pretty significant part of your body that now is focused inwards. It's focused on digestion. And so it needs your blood supply. And there's studies that show after a big meal that your IQ can drop 40 points because all of the resources are pulled away from other parts of your body, and it needs to digest, it needs to process. And arguably, we all should chill out after we've eaten. We should be sitting down when we eat. We should chill out so that we can let the digestion happen. And going back to Europe, Italy does this amazingly. If you've ever been to Italy, or anyone that has been to Italy knows that, their economic system in many towns and cities is set up like that, where the shops close from 1 to 4. You go home, you have lunch, and you chill out, you relax. And it means that dinner's much later in the evening. But we're meant to relax after meals so that we can rest, recover, digest, extract all the nutrition. And then once we've passed a certain stage of digestion, we've got all of our faculties and our resources back into our brain and to the rest of our body, and we can continue at capacity.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And thank you for sharing all the different vegetable options. I do love a nice slice of sourdough with some butter. That's probably one of my weaknesses. When I got to New York recently, I started just going down a binge. We can talk about it, like going through half a loaf in one sitting and feeling completely sick. But it was a whole thing. I've stopped that now. It's kind of like heroin if you think about it. But we're working through that. But on this whole topic, I want to jump back a little bit because I'd like to get an understanding of kind of who you are as well, what you're doing to contribute to the world, and how we got here in the first place.
Yeah, that's how we got here in the first place is, I guess, that idea of, that capitalist idea of figuring out how to sell stuff to lots of people and get them to come back. Because I think when it comes to health, wellness, obesity, diabetes, dementia, Alzheimer's, all of the diseases of civilization that we have created ourselves, almost the diseases of privilege or the diseases of wealth, most of them are a consequence in large part of our food consumption. And so I think it's twofold. It's that the individual needs to do some personal work, and it's about personal empowerment and making choices. But the other part is that the system is definitely rigged against us. Supermarkets have psychologists that design them so that they can ensure that we behave in a certain way and that we're led to certain products and that we have to walk past impulse purchase items before we get to the actual thing that we need, right? And so the system is rigged against us. I'm a firm believer of that. And so it's one thing to say governments should change. And it's like, yeah, I totally agree. Is anybody getting the government to change overnight? No. So the only other person that can change in the short term is the individual, right? And so my work comes in after I originally worked in a cancer hospital, and that was where my journey began to realize, the system, isn't really designed in our favor, because the food that patients get was awful. I was arguing with the dietitians about their recommendations for ice cream and McDonald's to cancer patients, which seemed like such basic information that was a bad idea for someone dying of a disease. And if you look at the recommendations for in-house dietitians at hospitals for diabetes, you question why they're giving some of these foods out when they spike blood sugar, and we know that. And so that was the beginning of me realizing, there's something not right about the system, the medical system, the food system. And so then I became a nutritionist and started talking to people about food. But the thing that I realized there was that people already knew what to eat. I've never spoken to anyone in the US, in Singapore, in New Zealand, Australia, all the places I've spoken. I've never spoken to anyone that did not know meat and veggies. Good for you. Like, everybody knows that, right? And so that's when I realized, I was like, the issue that people have is not education. And this is something that the government bangs on about. We need more education. We need to tell people, so they can understand what to do better and stuff like that. I don't believe we need more education. I think everybody's mum, grandma, influencer, whoever, somebody has told us all that we need to eat fruits and veggies and healthy meat, that kind of thing. And so the issue that people have is not, what do I need to do to be healthy? They already know. The issue people have is, why don't I do it then? And so that's how I ended up in this space of, I did some education to become an emotional and binge eating specialist and understand the psychological component and attachment to food and sugar addiction and dopamine addiction and that type of thing. But that's why I ended up here, because pretty much everybody I've ever worked with, they know what healthy food looks like. It's their own inability to regulate themselves in a way that leads to good choices consistently.
That makes a lot of sense. I will dig into the actual specifics of the diet side of things. But before that, what did your parents do? Was your mum a nurse?
Yeah. Mum's a nurse and dad works at the paper mill.
Okay. How did that dynamic in your life impact the way that you got to this point?
Yeah, I think the thing was, because I grew up in a small town in Australia, when I was really young, from an age that was really young up until early teen years, on school holidays and even before I went to school, I went to work with my mum a lot. And so with mum being a nurse, that resulted in me developing a really positive association with medicine and science, and that the hospital was this place of, it was this temple of health and amazingness that healed people. And so I think initially that led me into the world of medicine and science, because I felt like, or my ego felt like, that was a noble thing to do. This is important work. And I certainly felt like that at the start of working in a cancer hospital as well, that I was doing really serious work. And every time I ever meet people, even now, where I say I used to work in a cancer hospital, people say, oh my God, that's such amazing work. And it's really validating for me to hear that kind of stuff. But at some point in that work, I realized that I was playing a zero-sum game, because Big Pharma, just like I talked about the capitalist incentives of the food, Big Pharma is playing a very similar game, and they want people to stay on their products. They want people to pay for them. And I was a part of, I didn't have a high-ranking position in the hospital by any means, but I worked amongst about 33 clinical trials while I was there with hospitals all over the world. And I've never spoken to anyone in those contexts that was actively working on a cure for cancer. And I was a bit confused by that, and this was a long time ago now, but that was one of the things that sort of set my alarm bells off, to sort of say, why aren't we trying to figure this out? And in all of the meetings that I'm in, listening to these senior consultants and doctors talk, why is nobody talking about what caused their cancer? The diet, the lifestyle, the stress, the lack of sleep, the chemicals under the kitchen sink, the makeup that she put on every day for 45 years that's got toxic compounds in it. No one was ever talking about cause, and no one was ever talking about a life for these people where they no longer had cancer. And that really challenged my own paradigm that I had grown up with mum being a nurse, that the hospital was this temple of health and wellness. And now my sort of ideas are fairly different, in the idea that, I don't see it as healthcare. I see it as sick care, and occasionally we accidentally help people, which is maybe a controversial statement.
Yeah, I understand that to my core. I've had various health issues throughout my life, and most of the time I've been let down by the standard healthcare practices, and it took needing to just figure it out on my own before I began to have any positive impact. And now I'm the healthiest I've ever been, but it's ironic that I'm completely the opposite end of the spectrum to what is provided as appropriate information by, the mainstream, which sounds kind of quacky, but it's really not. It's coming from a place of experimentation and understanding of my body and understanding of the incentive structures that you spoke about briefly. Something that got me really interested a second ago was this recommendations from the in-house dietitians, and they're recommending ice cream and McDonald's. Are these, look, I have friends who are dietitians. I have, I've had conversations with people that do carnivore. I've had conversations with like vegans. I've had conversations with vegan dietitians. I've had conversations with a lot of different people that have a lot of different opinions on what is right. Do the people that genuinely recommend McDonald's and ice cream to cancer patients, is it an incompetence? Is it how do we get to that point is what really sticks out to me. And how can somebody justify that position with any meaningful, thought process that allows a semblance of the potential to be trying to help somebody?
Yeah, it's a really good question, because I think doctors do the same thing. My opinion is that they know that most people, without consciously being aware of it, they know that most people are addicted to food, have issues with their weight, and struggle to stick to dietary change. And so instead of trying to talk to this person or recommend them the right tools and resources to change their mindset, deal with their trauma, deal with the fear of dying that they've just been given with this diagnosis, they know that it's going to be too difficult to get them onto, a spirulina smoothie or, a carnivore diet or whatever it is. So it's lowest barrier to entry. And we're at a place where doctors are now accused of fat shaming for bringing up somebody's obvious obesity. Right. And so instead of actually trying to get to the core of the issue, the incentive structures, as you touched on before as well, we only spend a tiny amount of time with these people when really they need at least an hour of you to talk to them and get to know them. And don't get me wrong, I'm not naive. Macroeconomics doesn't work for the system if we spend an hour with everybody, because everybody needs so much help, and we're also sick and overweight and not well, and so there's it's a complex problem. But I think it's pretty obvious to me that that human health and the strength of nations and the productivity of nations is rapidly declining, and so something needs to be done. And I think personally that work is psychological. Does it mean you need to go to therapy with a psychologist for the rest of your life? Probably not. But just simply understanding why somebody can't say no to sugar or hasn't been able to regulate their alcohol every night that they have, that's a pretty good place to start to be able to actually get behavior change. So I think we get to a place where people sit in front of, we have dietitians and doctors that sit in front of people and they're like, I know this person won't change. I've been in this game for 20 years. Almost nobody ever changes. So let's go to the lowest barrier to entry thing, and I'll see them next month again. And I don't think doctors and dietitians are bad people, by the way. I think they're beaten down by a system that is not designed to help people in a serious long-term way. And so that they're as much victims to the system as the person in front of them. The other thing I will say in a cancer context and some other disease contexts is that sometimes you get to a situation where the chemotherapy or radiation is so devastating on the body that the recommendation for ice cream and McDonald's and pizza is about surviving, which is just we need calories. We need this system needs energy. However, my argument is that your liver It doesn't say, oh, because you're on a cancer journey, we're going to not process this pizza as a toxin, right? Your liver takes everything in as a nutrient or a toxin. That's it. There's one or the other. And so even though the system needs energy, sure, we're putting in pizza, ice cream, but we're also adding toxic load to an already toxic body because there's so much chemo and radiation and other medications in there as well. So I'm sort of, like, yeah, I get it. I get that the system needs energy, but there's much cleaner forms of energy.
Does the system need energy, though? From what I understand about, let's just go on the cancer topic as an example. From what I understand, the best way to approach it is significant amount of fasting. So does it need energy outside of bare minimum?
Yeah, that's a really good point because there is a lot of benefit to that. But I think the fasting is really beneficial in the absence of destruction. So what I mean by that is that if you've got chemotherapy, radiation coming in, which are useful drugs, but they are also known to be severely damaging, and it gives your body a lot of work to do. Whereas if you were just fasting and you didn't have that toxic load to deal with or that load of medication to deal with, then, you're unlikely to be, put into a hole from being totally destroyed. Because if you think about energy, if we're triggering the immune system and all of our defenses to go into full flight and all of these things being rearranged in our body medically and mechanistically, that's a lot of energy that's required to handle that. Which is why, sadly, sometimes the cause of death for some of these people is the medication, is the drug. And so that's the argument for why we need energy. However, there are massive benefits to fasting. The intermittent fasting, even before a chemo dose and radiation dose, can reduce the dose that you need and make it more effective. Or you can fully go, full hippie and fully go fasting for like weeks on end with the right support. And yeah, there are cases where that has been extremely beneficial as well.
That's wild. I have heard of some really strange things over my time that I can't put my finger on. But I know if I ever get to that point in my life, I'm going to be trying all of that wacky shit.
Me too.
I will be straight into the tail end. As an example, do you know a guy called Jack Kruse?
Yeah, I love Jack Kruse.
So he briefly mentioned on a podcast something to do with deuterium depleted water. Do you know anything about this?
No, I mean, I know what Jack Kruse has taught me.
Yeah. And I just found this book. So I'm like reading this like book on deuterium depleted water and protocols to help support cancer journeys. I don't know. And I'd have no business like with these kind of stuff. I'm just curious about it. So there's a lot of random things about it. I feel like, yeah, why not? I mean, it's it might come in handy one day. So
yeah, why not?
And I like going down these rabbit holes. Speaking of cancer, we're on this topic. It wasn't where I thought we would go, but while we're here, you briefly mentioned that meat and veg is your one of your ideal recommendations. Now, again, depending on who you talk to, depending on what you read, depending on what you listen to, like I've read the China study, I've watched all of the vegan movies, I've been carnivore, I've been vegan, I've done all of it.
Yeah.
And I can't quite wrap my head around this narrative of cancer, red meat cancer causation. Now, can you help me from what you understand?
Yes, I definitely can, because I get asked this question a lot. The core problem with the research that was used to leverage the idea that meat causes cancer is that it was not separated out in the data that the source of the meat matters. So if you think about a significant portion of that study was people in the US, and a significant portion of people in the US get most of their meat from fast food. Right. And so the vegan documentaries are fantastic at lumping in healthy, grass-fed, organic beef with Domino's pizzas. Right. They are not the same thing.
Do they do this on purpose?
Well, it's a good question because I don't know, because I've done multiple podcast episodes kind of debunking a lot of vegan documentaries, and that is consistently one of the things that they do. Nobody ever says, yes, it's organic grass-fed cattle or meat that is killing everybody. They always lump all meat in with processed meat, deli meat, salamis, pizza, hamburgers from In-N-Out Burger, and there's so many other factors, because even in those contexts, it's arguably not the meat, right? It's the oil that it's cooked in, it's the flavors that are added to it, it's the sauces that are full of sugar, it's the wheat bun that's wrapped around, it's the liter of soda or, soft drink that you get with it. There are so many other factors. And so it really, I'd be more open to buying into the vegan argument if they are able to say, we put a group of carnivores, let's say, going fully extreme, on a grass-fed organic diet exclusively, and we compared the vegans, and they were like, vegans were so much healthier. I'd buy into that, but everything I've seen so far does not compare a healthy meat-based diet, or even a healthy omnivore diet with just healthy meat components, irrelevant of the volume of that meat. So I don't know why it all gets lumped in the same. My cynical argument, or my cynical sort of mind, just says that the argument isn't strong enough, so they have to put it all together to make it more convincing. Because if we think about it, cigarette smoking and lung cancer, super convincing, right? If we think about smoking and pregnant women, super convincing that that's a bad idea. Whereas in this argument between veganism and carnivore, or veganism and omnivore, it's still grey. Doesn't matter how many studies come out. It's kind of confusing. It doesn't make full sense. We're not totally convinced in one direction. And so what that tells me is that if there's not some kind of overwhelming, obvious result, then it's probably a little bit different for everybody. And maybe we're not meant to be extreme dieters.
So guys like, say, Simon Hill, it's a big one at the moment. He's like really pushing the vegan kind of plant-based element. And do you know much about this argument around the cholesterol levels being elevated in the meat-eating camp versus vegan camp? And that then I hear about, people that are heavily on the meat say that it's a ratio that's important. And then the vegans turn around and say, no, the ratio doesn't matter. It's the total level, and you don't need to have good ratios if the total level's low. And yeah, it makes no sense. None of it makes any sense to me. So how do people look at the same studies, the same pieces of information, and get completely different results? What is going on?
Firstly, their personal bias is always at play. Every single one of us have a personal bias, right? And vegans that do vegan studies are trying to prove veganism. And carnivores are trying to prove carnivorism.
What would yours be?
My bias is omnivore. Like, I just think we're all different, and that we all get something different out of anything, and what I mean by that is that some people are going to feel better on a 70% meat diet with, a little bit of broccoli with every meal, let's say, or whatever vegetable, whereas other people are going to feel so much better. And my partner and I are perfect examples of this. So her background is sort of Sri Lankan, and so she eats mostly plant-based, a lot of curries, a lot of lentils, a lot of beans, a lot of rice, that type of thing. And she is quite slender naturally. She eats plenty of it, and so, but if I eat too much like her diet, I start to feel inflamed. I start to feel a little bit like I can feel my brain fog going on, even though it's whole real food, even though it's perfectly healthy food that, Sri Lanka, India, Pakistan, that area of the world have eaten for a millennia. However, for me, I feel much more optimal if I'm on sort of a 70-ish% meat-based diet. I usually have vegetables, with every single meal. I still eat nuts and seeds and fruits and that kind of stuff, but the majority of what I eat is meat. And when I move back in that direction after we've done too many curries for a while, I start to feel a bit more like myself, right? And so I think that we all have some kind of ratio on this spectrum, but to completely neglect an entire food group that humans have eaten for a millennia, forever, in all cultures, is naive to me. And the idea to say that all of a sudden in this last 50 years or 100 years of society, we're all of a sudden not meant to eat a certain food group, but we did for the last 100,000 or 10,000 or a million years, to me is a little bit like we're getting further and further away from natural.
Yeah, that makes sense. What's your thoughts around the spiritual component of vegetarianism and veganism?
Yeah, I like that question because I think the idea that a lot of people go vegan and vegetarian is often that ethical, moral, spiritual conversation. And I think the reality is, and I grew up in the country surrounded by farms, I've worked on farms. The reality is that in my experience, most people that make quote unquote ethical, moral, spiritual decisions are often in apartment buildings in a city. And they are completely removed from what actually happens in nature. Like not people, but animals in the forest, in the bush, in the jungle. Like a bear doesn't walk up to a moose and say, hey, do you mind politely dying? Like that would be really helpful for my family to be able to eat, right? That doesn't happen. And so the idea that farming, the way that we slaughter with farming is inhumane. Sure, you could argue all death is inhumane. But if you compare that to how a cow or a buffalo would be hunted by a lion in the wild, or a deer would be hunted by a bear in the wild, and you watch that on a video, it takes ages, it sounds horrific, it's extremely graphic. And so the question is then asked, what is ethical death? Right? If every species, if every living thing has to die at some point, and the argument of these sort of ivory tower city dwelling vegans that say, farms are horrific, well, I don't think it is that horrific if you compare it to natural and nature, because that is horrific. I don't know. You can Google some natural, hunts by some animals, and they're brutal. They're absolutely brutal. Do I think farming practices can get better so that animals are healthier and happier? For sure. I totally agree with that. I'm not necessarily condoning some of the horrific farming practices that do exist, but I would say they're the minority. Like the farmers I've spoke to through my podcast, through my network. I'm friends with one of the big farming groups here in Australia, the CEO of that. Most farmers care about their animals because the quality of the animal determines how much they're able to sell it for. So a happy, healthy animal produces better meat. Right, the quality of the meat is improved. You can sell it to different buyers, different butchers, that will sell it at a higher price. So the idea that most farmers, want to harm and hurt and do damage and want their animals to live in horrible conditions, mostly I don't buy that. I think they're like all industries. There are terrible, people and terrible, practices and situations. Of course, in every industry for everything, but coming back around to that spirituality, I think, most people understand that happy, healthy animals, people, produces better outcomes. And spiritually, if you ever sort of go with a hunting group that's ever any good, or you learn to hunt, you will learn that there is a spiritual aspect to thanking the animal. And this is actually illustrated quite well in the movie Avatar, is that you thank the animal for its life, because we all die, right? And all of those animals just go into the ground to fertilize the dirt, which then produces the vegan crops, right? So the vegan process needs blood and it needs flesh in the dirt to be able to produce healthy crops.
It's an interesting point you make. Let me think about where I was going to go with this. So I think the goal of it is to minimize the harm where possible, right? But then also I've started seeing content and opinions around the amount of non-livestock animals that are killed through the process of farming for vegetarian led, crops. So I don't think there's any free lunch really. It's all So it's all part of the circle of life, right?
Completely. And often in those sort of vegan, vegetarian documentaries, going back to that circle of life idea, they show, parts of the Amazon forest being destroyed for farmland, for animals and stuff like that. And my argument is, what are we destroying in order to plant more crops? Because if you're eating a mostly carbohydrate diet, which you have to as a vegan or a vegetarian, we need more crops. We need more plants to go into your body for you to get the same amount of energy that you would out of a steak, right? And am I saying you should just eat steak? No, I'm not. I'm saying that it should be a bit of both. But I think that ethical, moral, climate change argument is sort of debunked a little bit by the fact that it's like, sure, let's say we need one paddock that's got a bunch of cows in it that'll feed 10,000 people. If we want to feed those same 10,000 people with plants only, now we need 50 paddocks, right? And so, and there's a whole conversation to go down with, cow farts and carbon emissions and stuff like that. But I think my bias, and you were asking about this before, my bias really is human health. I don't necessarily think about diet ideologies. I look at the person in front of me, I look at myself and think, what's the optimal that I can be? And as a result of making that decision as to what that is, I, of course, try and choose ethical. I try and choose the cleanest, the healthiest. It's always lovely to hear that it's like, oh, they really care about their animals and they look after them and they talk to them. And they've all got names and, whatever the thing is, it's nice to know that the guy on the other end is also a human like me.
Yeah, for sure. That makes a lot of sense. I want to tap into some of Jack Kruse's work, and I want to kind of tie it into what you've been talking about, because you mentioned before that you find him quite interesting. Yeah. He speaks a lot about the time around when to eat and how the circadian rhythm and the sunlight and your general geographical location impacts your ability to digest and your microbiome and other components. So looking at potentially an optimum diet and an optimum structure of that diet, what would you say to somebody if you were going to give them a plan from the moment they wake up to the moment they go to bed?
Yeah, well, I guess that would depend on their health issues firstly. But I think
just say an average person.
Yeah. So I guess for me, the first thing that I would want someone to do is steer clear of carbohydrates. So if you wanted to eat breakfast, I would say wait ideally 90 minutes to 2 hours before you put food in your body. Same with coffee. So don't put caffeine into your body. And a lot of people are going to hear me say that and be like, I couldn't possibly do that. But we want to push that coffee out. So ideally it's just water in the first 2 hours. Then if we're going towards our first meal, the thing that we want to focus on is protein and fat. And so, yes, that's more that maybe carnivore, maybe keto, maybe low carb idea there in the morning. The reason for that is because if we're talking about sort of most of the people listening, or sort of the average American, the average Australian, is that person is already on a roller coaster of their blood sugar going up and down all day, and grains are often a big part of their breakfast, whether it be crumpets, whether it be pancakes, whether it be cereal, toast, whatever it is. And so if we start the day with refined sugars and carbohydrates, in whatever form, that sets us off for the blood sugar roller coaster where we go up with our energy and then we feel the crash. And this is the thing that really perpetuates that 6 meals a day idea, right? Because it's like you always need a snack to keep your blood sugar up. So we don't want to start that roller coaster. So I get people to lean in the direction of keto, carnivore, low carb at breakfast or for their first meal. And ideally, that'll easily carry them through to lunch. You won't have a craving if you get that bit right. And then we go towards lunch. And then I'd say, that's a place where we can start adding in some above ground vegetables. So you might get a salad, you might even do steak and broccoli and carrots and stuff like that. But leaning more, you can do carrots, you can do like pumpkin, but you don't want to go right like into your potatoes, into your sweet potatoes and stuff like that, because those complex carbohydrates are really going to, for most people, sort of shoot off that blood sugar. So we sort of, middle of the day is more low carb, salads, above ground vegetables alongside your meat or fish or whatever it might be for your protein. Protein should be a feature of all of the meals because that's the most satiating nutrient, and we're made of protein. We're made of amino acids. So we need to be making sure that we're supplying our body with a fuel that can keep building the body and healing the body. And then dinner, that would be the time for anybody that wants it. Dinner time is the time to get the carbohydrates involved. So you might, again, next to your protein source, whatever that is, and if that's plant-based, that's fine. But then that's the place to get a lot of good veggies in. You might do roast veggies. And the reason that nighttime is better is because you can actually ride the carb crash to sleep, which is nice. So you can sort of, eat a few hours out from bed, and then as a carb crash would sort of start happening, you're able to actually go to bed. And so I guess that's roughly what I would guide people to do, anyone that was in front of me. And that's 3 meals a day. Some people feel optimal on 2. Some people like 2 and a snack. Some people like 3. But I think beyond that, then it's about your energy requirements. Like, how much are you going to the gym? How stressful is your job? Do you work out a lot? Do you walk a lot? And the other factors that are unique to the individual. But I think following that template of sort of, keto low carb for meal 1, keto low carb meal 2, and then high carb or whatever you want to do at dinner, that's generally what I get people to do.
Mm-hmm. And how have you found that success-wise?
Really successful because we've been doing it for 5 or 6 years. We've been doing it for 5 or 6 years with our client base. And the reason for that is, remember, a big part of what we do is the psychological aspect too. So we don't want anyone to feel deprived or that they're missing out or that they're restricted from anything. And particularly for hormones, for female hormones and females going through perimenopause, menopause, those carbohydrates are really important in being able to stabilize some of their nutrient intake and just preventing them from going, headfirst into a binge. So that, from my experience, that's how we do that. And the other thing is that a lot of people, if they feel like they're on a restrictive diet, at some point will just totally give up that whole all in or all out idea. And so if we don't have the carbohydrates in there at all, and we can still be low carb for all of those meals, but if we don't have those carbohydrates in there at all, some people can just start to really feel this craving or this desire or this absence of something that should be there, which then ends up being wine, chocolate, cheese all at once, and then they're back to square one type thing. But the main reason for that structure is that we get the nutrients from the carbohydrates that some people really benefit from at night, which means we don't set off that roller coaster all day. If we set off that roller coaster in the morning, then we're going to be looking for the snacks within an hour of breakfast. We're going to be looking for the donuts, the bagels, the muffins, the chocolate, the whatever it is. And then we're going to do the same thing after lunch. And if lunch is really carb heavy, then pretty much everybody knows about the 3 p.m. crash. So we've been doing that for this whole time, basically, because we don't want people to begin the roller coaster in the morning or have any significant crashes when they can't actually have a nap, which is like what you were talking about a little bit earlier, right? Which is this idea that you eat and then you feel like you need to relax or chill out or, you're a bit sort of tired. So we don't want to create that scenario for people that have got to go to work, for people that have got kids to chase around all day. And plus, their body fat benefits in all of that, because whilst our blood sugar is not through the roof, our insulin is not through the roof. So we actually have a little bit of access to burn some body fat there.
Mm-hmm. So with the idea around having carbs at night, and going down the Jack Kruse thing, he mentioned, I listened to the podcast between him and I think Andrew Huberman, and he mentioned that it's ideal to have carbs in the morning and that the tiredness of carbohydrates is actually like a body reaction to the carbohydrates and shouldn't necessarily be occurring. Do you know much about this? I don't know much about this, but that popped into my mind as something.
Yeah, it's a great question. And that was the podcast that was like 7 hours long? That was an epic podcast. I listened to it as well.
Yeah, I listened to it.
Yeah. So I would agree with what he is saying, but we've got to remember that most people listening are not in healthy bodies. And I would even go as far as saying Jack Kruse is also not in a healthy body. He does not look like a pinnacle of fitness, right? Which is, it's interesting to get up on a
So do we listen to anything he has to say?
No, we should listen to what he has to say. I'm just saying that if you can't prove that it works for yourself, it's pretty challenging to tell other people they're doing the wrong thing, right? But I would say that I agree with what he says from a mechanistic standpoint, but we can't really arrive there until we've got people's blood sugar under control, because otherwise carbohydrates in the morning are just going to continue beginning the same roller coaster that has happened for a long time. And so I'm not necessarily an advocate of staying on the same diet for your entire life, because it's sometimes you've got to think therapeutically about a diet, which is that this is the diet for this chapter whilst I heal this wound or heal this disease or reverse this addiction or whatever it might be. And then we can get to more sort of wholesome meals all of the time. There's no real structure around it. You listen to your body, you go towards what you want, you're fine, it doesn't trigger cravings. Amazing. But the carbohydrates most people go towards in the morning for convenience, for cost, for, whatever, are not good, healthy carbohydrates. And I would say even some of the people I work with, we could give them a potato in the morning and it would still cause the same thing as the cereal, because it's still that complex carbohydrates that's shooting off the blood sugar.
Just quickly though, I love doing this podcast. If it's positively impacted you in some way and you would like to support us, please subscribe. By subscribing, it allows us to build a much bigger base of listeners, which results in better guests, better production, and a better show overall. Alternatively, please take a look at the affiliate links of the products that I use and love in the comments below and consider purchasing using those links. They'll give you a discount and they'll also provide the podcast a small kickback. These are two very easy ways for you to support us as we continue to grow the podcast that we absolutely love doing. Thank you for your support, and now back to the episode. I've had a really interesting experience with a lot of this stuff because I've tried everything. I've tried the fasting in the morning. I've tried, eating in the morning. I've tried eating fruit. I've tried eating, so many different things. But now what I've got to, and I'm finding it quite promising and quite interesting, and I'd love to get your thoughts around what's actually happening, is in an ideal world, I'm waking up. Well, right now, actually, take a step back. I'm waking up. I'm drinking like a gut repair smoothie because I'm doing a bit of a gut protocol, and that gut repair smoothie has some prebiotics, probiotic, postbiotics, a bunch of berries, some honey, nuts, olive oil, collagen, some like fibrous stuff, and a few other bits and pieces. I have that the moment I wake up as my first thing. And then maybe an hour later, I'm cooking, and that meal that I'm cooking is like a grass-fed steak, and it's broccoli, and it's cauliflower, and it's hemp seeds, and it's chia seeds, and avocado, and that's like great. A big meal, and it's a great meal. And it's funny you say that, like, you don't want to have the same diet, but at the end of every single meal, I'm like, that was bloody great. Can't wait to do that again tomorrow. It doesn't. I don't want anything else. Why? It's the best. But that's been really, really interesting, because what ends up happening after that is I'm not hungry for a long time. And I'm not really, when I get to dinner time, in the past, when I've fasted and I've started eating at 12 or at 1, I find myself wanting chocolate, wanting chips, wanting everything late at night. It's like I ramp up to complete degeneracy, and then I go to sleep full, just binging. But right now, doing this approach, when I do have that really big meal, full of protein, full of fats, full of carbs early on in the day, I don't really find there's any craving. So is that a blood sugar thing? Is that a problem around my body's ability to digest the nutrients? Is it approaching, breaking a fast incorrectly? Like what's mechanistically happening in that example?
Yeah, I think there's 3 factors to what's going on there. 1 is the blood sugar. 2 is satiation. So satiation is often balanced by electrolytes. And also then the third thing, which is sort of factors into satiation as well, is that we've got nutrient requirements and nutrient receptors, right? So all 3 of those things are going to lead to a lack of cravings, a lack of hunger. Leptin, which is, Jack Kruse has the leptin protocol, which is incredible. But this idea that leptin is the opposite to hunger, right? It tells us to stop eating, switch off, go and focus on other stuff. So those 3 things all factor into that leptin response that you have, and that, and 1, you're eating well, you like it, it's got nutrition in it, it's, emotionally satiating, it's physically satiating, it's nutritionally adequate for what your body needs in that moment. And so that's what results in, firstly, that desire to, or not, lack of desire to go towards the next food or the next meal for ages. So I think that's a good thing. But I also think that, if you're having the experience of wanting to binge at night, then the way that we set the day up is the most important thing. And I always say, what you put in first, you crave later. right? So if you put in cereal or sugar or honey or any of that kind of stuff, it's likely, not always the case, but it's likely that that is the thing that you will crave as your mind, your body gets tired. And we all get tired every day. Or stress is added to the system. It goes towards, what's the fuel source we put in first? Because we've just told our brain, and this is like an evolutionary part of our brain, we've told our brain from the second we were conscious which fuel source is available in our area. Right. And so if you think about that, like we're out in the wild, your brain needs to know what fuel source is available in the area so you can go and hunt it, kill it, pick it, whatever it might be. So that's what I believe is driving this, what you put in first, you crave later. And I don't even know, it must be in the hundreds now, the amount of clients that say that whole idea of what you put in first, you crave is so true, because we get them to change to that sort of dietary template that we talked about before of sort of what you put in, Adam, after that smoothie. That's where we start everybody. And so then people realize that the things that they're looking for later are more of the fat protein things, which generally are going to lead them towards another meal, as opposed to going towards a chocolate bar, which has basically no protein in it, right? So yeah, I would say it's those three factors: the blood sugar, the satiation levels, and the nutrients that you're getting in the morning.
Do you have any understanding around what impact the fasting has on the blood sugar spikes? Because I notice even if going down this idea of what you put in first, you crave last, like I would start off my first meal in the past with a steak, but then my cravings would be massive and problematic down the line. But it's as though when I don't fast, I don't end up with cravings.
Yeah. Well, I guess it's kind of like that conversation around deprivation and restriction, right? Is that like people can definitely overfast, and there's also this idea in the keto community that you can eat as much fat as you want, or if you fast, you can eat as much as you want, and it's still. Binge eating is still binge eating, right? If you're putting an excess amount of food into your body than you require, then it's still not helpful. It doesn't matter how long you fasted. But if you fast too long each day, or you find that you've got this pattern where you fast a certain amount each day and it results in a binge or just massively overeating the first meal, which is called sort of loosely called refeeding syndrome, then obviously you're fasting too long. You're telling your system that you're in a famine situation, and it might only be the early stages of that. It's not like you're starving or dying or anything like that, but you're telling your system like food is scarce, there's not much around. So the second you hit the food, or at some point during that day, you're trying to get all of that stuff in, and that goes back to what we just talked about. You're trying to hit your nutrient receptors and get them to standard and to threshold. You're trying to get satiated, and satiation and leptin is sometimes harder to find when you're so hungry, because the hunger response is making sure that you overeat, because you've just told your body in the last 24 hours we need to overeat because there's a lack of nutrition and food available. So I think definitely people can fast too long.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And what value do the extended fasts have? And also, don't mind the glasses; it's starting to get late, so and I've got these big lights shining in.
Yeah, no, so I totally get it. I've got mine here. I'm on the yellow though. Extended fasts.
These are funny. I was going to say, these are funny. I will go out to like a club or something and I'll wear these and people just think that I'm trying to be cool, but there's no coolness whatsoever. It's purely based on outcomes. So
I like it. I do the same thing. Get some weird looks. I'm a hardcore Jack Cruz fanboy.
Yeah, that's good. He's got a lot to share, a lot of valuable insight to share. But anyway, continue. You were saying?
Value of extended fasts. There's lots. But I would say it's also like running a marathon in a way, which is that unless you're David Goggins, you probably shouldn't run a marathon every single day because it's not good for your body. So there's too much of a good thing, right? So extended fasts are built into religions, around the world, have been practiced for thousands and thousands and thousands of years because there's huge benefit to them, whether that be spiritual, whether that be biological. But my personal interest is physically and biologically in those fasts, which is basically if we get out of the way, and we talked about this earlier in regards to, when we eat, a significant portion of our physical body is being required to digest, to process, to extract. And so the idea of extended fasts is like really giving our gums to bum a break from doing all of that work. And so it allows our body to focus on regenerating and healing itself, which can be really tricky for some people to make sense of, because it's like, if I'm not putting fuel in, how am I able to fix anything? And unless you're sort of in an impoverished scenario, often we have plenty of resources available in our liver, in our body. And once we get out of the way of the sugar and the vegetable oil and the toxins and stuff like that, your body can do some really great healing work. Autophagy is one of the most spoken about things that people get from those extended fasts, which is cellular recycling. So your body's got time to actually look through the cells that are damaged, that are producing proteins that are misfolded, and actually say, hey, it's time to retire you guys. So they destroy those cells and they go back and rebuild new cells with the old proteins and the old bits and pieces. And so autophagy is an incredible benefit. You can get amazing mental clarity. You can sort of have some of your behavioral patterns reset. However, I would say the way you go into an extended fast and the way you come out of it is important, so you don't trigger refeeding syndrome and just end up eating everything in sight for 3 days. And if people are thinking about water fasts as a weight loss strategy, I think that's a very bad idea, because a lot of the weight that we lose really rapidly is water weight. It's not actually body fat. And also, if you go too hard in the wrong direction, you can end up burning plenty of your lean muscle mass, and you don't want to do that. You want to make sure that most of what you burn in that fast is going to be your body fat and very little muscle, because muscle's really important. We don't want to be losing muscle mass. So yeah, I think they're really beneficial, but they should be done irregularly and ideally guided, so you've got the right support, so you know that you're doing it the right way.
So I'd love to kind of understand a actual, let's just say, quarterly protocol around the extended fast and what you would recommend in that space. So someone who's, let's just use me as an example. I've done a number of extended fasts. I'm into this space. What would you recommend for me?
Yeah, so that's pretty much what I do with the quarterly thing. I sort of listen to my body a little more now, but basically I do sort of 3 to 5 days, or for yourself, Adam, like 3 to 5 days would be a good spot to sort of do regularly, or that quarterly thing. However, sort of as the disclaimer, when people start entering this space, I don't encourage anyone to just try 3 days. I say, all right, what's your normal eating pattern? And let's say it's 12-12, right? I mean, 12 hours of feeding, 12 hours with no food at all. Then I say, okay, over the next few months, we're going to build up over time. So we're going to do, going to go to 16-8, we're going to go to 18-6. You're going to experience your first 24 hours of fasting, right? And then we're going to go 36 hours, and then we're going to go 40 hours. And so I want to build this person's metabolic muscle, or their adaptation muscle, over time, because if we shock the system, there's some really bad headaches, and there's really, really hardcore keto flu that people go through, and like the stomach pains, and they've never been in this situation. So you don't want to walk into a gym for the first time and deadlift 300 kilos, right? Or 500 pounds. That's a bad idea. So we don't want to do that here with the metabolism either. So you want to build up over time. But once you get there, which should take a fair while, you don't want to do this quickly, especially women that are cycling on their menstrual cycle. Men can do it a little bit faster because we have 24-hour cycles, but women, you don't want to mess with your hormones through that process. So you'll have to do it a bit slower. But when you get there, you want to be able to, I believe, go into the fast eating low carb, because you want to get your body used to that sort of ketone production and that utilization of the ketones, so your body fat or the fat in your diet as fuel. And you want to make sure that you're well hydrated as you go into that. And you want to make sure there's no sugar, no vegetable oil, no toxins. You want your liver to do the work of detoxing.
So would you say something along the lines of, a steak with like avocado, just a really high fat, high protein meal as your last meal before, say, a 36-hour fast?
Yeah, I think that would be okay. I find that's okay for me. The other thing to remember is whatever you eat last is going to sit in your stomach or your gut the longest, because in many ways the gut acts as a gastrointestinal conveyor belt, if you like. And so remembering what's going to sit in there the longest needs to ideally be full of nutrition, which is why you want to steer clear of the chocolate and the fast food. You don't want that stuff sitting in there because your body will just take as much as it can from it in a fasting situation. So yeah, I think that kind of meal would be okay. But also you want to, over the days before, you want to be doing those kind of meals as well, just to get your body in that state. And then basically, obviously, you want to fast. You want to wake up ideally and go into sort of that fasted state. I really believe that lowering the stress or the stimulation in that time is even more beneficial, although sometimes that's not possible. You probably don't necessarily want to go to the gym, and put yourself under heaps of stress, because you're going to just be demanding your body to get resources, and it'll get it from your lean muscle. So you don't want to encourage that. You want it to stay in that body fat burning state. And then, you sort of go 3 to 5 days listening to your body. If you're starting to wake up a lot at night, that's because your body's got high cortisol and saying, hey, time to go and hunt. Like, wake up, we need to go and find food, basically is what's going on there. And then, the way that you come back into it, you want to be really smooth on your gut, because if people go too hard or with the wrong foods, you can get explosive diarrhea, you can get all sorts of gut problems. So the best way to start... You can
die. Yeah, I've heard stories of people actually dying, right?
Yeah, absolutely. You can totally die from refeeding syndrome and getting it wrong. So you want to start with warm liquids, is what I believe is the right thing to do. So you might even start with just like a hot lemon water, or bone broth is sort of my golden go-to for everybody that I ever work with. That's a part of the conversation. And then the next thing, you might want to move towards warm or hot soft foods. So you might have a little bit of steak. You don't want to do too much overloading of the gut in the first sort of 24 to 48 hours. You want to really nurture it back into your normality. And some people can go quicker than others. If you've done it a bunch of times and you've trained your body a little bit, you can probably go straight to, whatever you want first. But I think, warm, soft foods are important. You might even have some carbohydrates in there. So, some soft vegetables that have been cooked in the oven, that type of thing. And always adding in a little bit of protein as well. You always want a bit of protein, especially in a situation where you've been protein deficient, like your body's looking for protein. So you want to put that in as well. And over that sort of 24 to 48 hours, slowly building back up to normal meal size, being very emotionally aware of your desire to go and just smash a heap of food. That can be really present. So you might need to wrestle with that a little bit so that you don't do yourself any damage or harm, basically.
Is there a value in breaking the fast with some good fruits, like some berries?
Yeah, I mean, it just depends who you sort of follow. I mean, I think, when we've been in a ketogenic state for so long, our blood sugar is hyper susceptible to going off the charts. And this comes back to the same sort of, I guess, foundational philosophy that my own client work is based on, which is that what we put in first, we crave. And after we wake up in the morning on any day, and if we wake up after a fast, our blood sugar is the most susceptible right then and there. So with that in mind, my thought is that we want to ease ourselves into normal blood sugar regulation slowly over the next couple of days, rather than starting with something that's going to shoot it off straight away. And fruit will. Obviously, everything, goes at a different level, and our bodies are all slightly different. But I think, personally, I want to ease myself back into normal blood sugar management, rather than saying there's been nothing for days, blood sugar's through the floor, hey, here's a dose of sugar, and then it's just like off to the races, basically.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. And a side note with the fasting for women side of things, I haven't read it, but I know it exists and I've heard it's pretty solid. The book Fast Like a Girl. Have you read that?
Mindy
Would you
Pels.
recommend anyone would you recommend that as a book for like anyone that like wants to understand the female approach to fasting, like the optimum approach to fasting?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as you can imagine, like all of us in the nutrition space, there's things we all agree on and disagree on, and but the reality is we're all fighting over helping people, right? so yeah, I think Mindy's great. So is Dr. Stephanie Estima. I think her book's even better actually, in regards to fasting for women. So that's she's got a book called Better Me, I think it's called. But yeah, Dr. Stephanie Estima's stuff is really good too. But yeah, women definitely need to do this differently. And sure, there might be a woman here and there that's like, I can do it anytime I like. And that woman is definitely the minority.
Fair enough. So look, I'm conscious of time. I'd love to just chat to you around some general philosophical and life thoughts and ideas. Would you be down for that?
Yeah, let's do it.
Cool. So what views do you have that would make people either scratch their heads or get angry?
That's a very good question. I mean, if we're talking in the context of this conversation, I'm not on board with healthy at every size. Sure. I don't like that idea. So that's one.
Go on.
Well, I think it just promotes sickness. It celebrates being in sick bodies that are less capable, that are less able, and normalizing being sick and unwell is not a world that I want to live in, right? I want people to be healthy, strong, self-capable, not needing, me to pick up their snowflakes for them, right? And if we talk about the way that we use the medical system is, we're getting to a point where people are so severely sick and unwell, and they're celebrating that with their YouTube channels or their, the influencers that are proudly fat and obese and whatever it is. It begs the question for me, does that mean I get to pay less tax because you use the healthcare system 100 times more than I do in my life? So there's multiple layers of this conversation. I think people are worthy at every size. I think people are lovable at every size. I think you can be happy at any size. But the idea that we are now celebrating obesity and celebrating being sick is not something that I believe is true at all. So healthy at every size it's an emotional opinion. It's definitely not a fact.
Yeah, it doesn't really make sense in my head. I'm trying to find a video right now. There's one where I remember seeing it. I can't find it, but I remember seeing a video where it was somebody on TikTok going, "Oh, okay, so body positivity influencers. Let's look at this one. Oh, she died." It's like, oh, what about this one? Oh, she died. Oh, she's dead too. Oh, actually, like there was like 6 of them in a row, just dead. That's kind of scary. That's not
totally.
When
scary.
Did we get to the point where? Yeah, when did we get to the point where we are celebrating? I'm going to be careful with my words here, but like mediocrity. Like it's not good to be unhealthy. It's not good for anything.
Yeah, I completely agree. Well, being obviously, we're from Australia, right? Tall poppy syndrome here is really, really bad. And so it's that idea that you mediocre is normal and safe, and as soon as you start being better than mediocre, the Australian culture particularly, but lots of cultures, they cut you down. Even your own family, your own friends, they say, hey, don't do that. Don't do that. That's too risky, And something that I found when I'm in the US is that, the growth and success and path that I've chosen is celebrated by random strangers, that just think it's awesome, have a crack at life. But in Australia, tall poppy syndrome and this idea of pulling everybody back to mediocrity, I think that's been around a long time. And I think social media makes it even worse because we've got even more influence and more following of our friends and family that can watch our every move. And so it's like, if this person starts to move out of my little social circle, I'll judge them, Like, I think it's horrible that we celebrate mediocrity. But I get it. Everybody's traumatized, devoid of love, needing attention and care, and wants to matter. But once upon a time, you used to have to work to solve those problems, and now you don't have to work at all.
Well, you do have to work. I don't think it will last. We'll end up just going extinct as a society.
Yeah.
At the rate we're going. So, yeah. Repopulate the earth, everybody. Have lots of children. Don't listen to that narrative. Ice your balls and have lots of kids. So on that note, what's the biggest thing over the last 2 years that you've changed your mind on?
Oh, biggest thing that I've changed my mind on. Probably having kids, because I'm having one.
Hey, congratulations. How are you feeling?
Thanks, man. Excited. Mostly excited, a little bit nervous, and that nervousness comes from like that maybe masculine provider kind of vibe or energy of being like, all right, I've got, instead of just scraping through and making sure my business makes enough money to pay rent, now I've got to feed 3 people and house them for 30 years. That's I'm feeling the pressure of that.
Yeah. Yeah, I saw, I think it was Alex Hormozy had this like piece of content where he was like, on average, single men make less money than married men who make less money than married men with kids. Yeah. Like, makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm single living in New York, and I don't have that big of a fire up my ass, but if I was about to have a kid, damn, I wouldn't be fucking around anymore.
Yeah. So that's my life right now.
Yeah. Good luck. Yeah, good luck. I feel like you'll thrive. Yeah, it'll make you a better human. It'll make you a stronger man, and you probably love the different, outcomes that occur in the rest of your life as well. So, when are they due?
February 2025.
Nice. Do you know if it's a boy or a girl?
No, we're not finding out actually, which is a bit sort of old school of us.
You're not finding out. Okay. No viral gender reveal party. No, we're going to find out when we find out. And I guess, we just kind of felt, there was part of us that felt, there's so many things that are commercialized about life now that are just opportunities to spend more money on things. And again, it's social media driven so that everybody on social media gets to see a pretty video and whatnot. And so, we just thought, this is one of those things that's a bit too commercialized for us. Fair enough. Well, good luck. And
Thanks,
next question I had for you was, what is the what is the kindest thing anyone's ever done for you?
Probably sit with me through my very traumatic healing journey for many years. And that was a partner that I had through my 20s. And she stuck around way longer than she should have because I treated her awfully. But by far, that's the kindest thing someone's ever done for me, is give me years of her life so that I could grow up and turn into a man and heal some wounds that were causing lots of other people lots of problems. So, that's a maybe deeper answer than expected, but by far, that's the kindest thing anyone's ever done.
Have you told her that?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a chapter that's been closed some years ago now, but we spent 9 years together, and without that, I would probably still be on tour, drinking piss, getting loose all the time, when I was a drummer, and I would never have actually dealt with my shit, confronted myself, got into personal development, started a health business. None of this would have existed without her sort of, gently and forcefully pushing me along to level up and be better.
There's something to be said about like especially for a guy, and I've experienced it myself, with like just the feminine nudge, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
It's a very subtle approach to getting good outcomes, that if the person knows about it and how to approach it, it's really, really effective. A very indirect but effective way to communicate.
Oh, completely. And I think as well, one of the things about the sort of personal development movement is that it really, in my experience, it really feminized me and feminizes men. But I think what we need to realize is that at some point it's okay to be a man. And I think sort of swinging over into the more feminine aspects of ourself, allow us to understand emotions, ourself, how to navigate, how to communicate, and we get a good set of skills from doing that. But I think like finding ourselves again back in that masculinity with those more feminine skills available, and those sort of being able to be in touch with that part of ourselves, it really makes us for a very wholesome human. But I think the modern narrative is that men are being masculine is scary and toxic and evil and blah, blah, blah. And so it's sort of forced this culture of feminized men that are soft and caring and emotional. And I think, you've got to swing into the feminine a little bit to do some healing, because that's where love and care and repair in that kind of way is done. But also coming back to, and whatever it means for the individual, the true man that you are, or taking that step from being a broken boy into a whole man is, doesn't necessarily need to come with all the social and public and political ideologies of what a man should or shouldn't be,
Well, there's definitely I think big societal pushback around that narrative as well now. I think a lot of people did try the feminine man thing, and from what I can gather based on like the beat of books and content and anyone that's generally, sitting in the middle of the spectrum that isn't far, on the left or far on the right, say politically and ideologically. Let's try that again.
Nailed it.
Sitting here, thanks, man. Sitting here and saying stuff like we're struggling to find the right people, and men are struggling to find the direction and connection that they need, and women are struggling to find the guys that they can feel like they can fall into their feminine with, because it's all a lot of that whole element. A lot of those elements have been lost, but they are coming back. Like I did a podcast with a guy called Man Talks. I've done Connor Beaton. He's amazing. He speaks about this stuff all the time, and I think there is beginning to be more of an acceptance for just men to be men again, which is great, which is really, really great. Yeah. Looking forward to.
I totally agree.
I think there's a lot of value in it. There's a lot of value in what's been said, but I think we've fallen a little bit too far on the pendulum, swinging too far in the feminine. And I
think that pendulum kind of has to go back and forth to find a middle ground, right? It's like if we never went too far into the feminine, then men would still be the grumpy, arrogant, typical cliche 1940s man of the housewife too scared to say what she thinks around the guy that might get really angry at her, who doesn't know what her problem is, who can't communicate with her. So we kind of had to swing all the way into the feminine to be like, what is it about over here? What is going on over here, right? And I think, as we sort of figure out what we can take from the feminine and take from the masculine to build ourselves into a capable human is going to be beneficial. And especially for those men, and this could be me, I don't know yet, but raising daughters, and being able to cultivate healthy relationships with their fathers so that then they don't produce another generation of people with daddy issues, right?
Yeah, definitely. Well, it takes a strong, I guess, thinking this through, not from being a father by any means, but there's the two polarities that are super valuable in the development of a child, and that just like strong, directional, maybe a little bit harder masculine, but still kind of gentle and thoughtful approach is great, and that will go a long way for the development of any child. It's a really, really important place as a man to hold, like this holding this place of strength, but also like I guess it's kind of like a chivalrous position. Like you are strong, you can cause harm when needed to, but you choose not to, because you come at everything from a place of deep respect for the world around you. Yeah, and knowing when to use your capabilities and your abilities, in the right context, and being able to show that great harm could be done, but the choice not to, and the strategic use of your brain to be able to solve the problem in a safer way, in a healthier way, in a mature way, that's
that's respectable, that's commendable. And I think, any man that's got the capability to harm someone physically and sort out their problems very rapidly, that is able to show, hey, I can make a smarter choice here, I can handle this in a better way, but if anybody's in danger, I'm the person that's got their back. I think, that's the kind of man we all want to be, right?
Definitely. Yeah, it takes work. So one of the last few questions I have for you is, if you could only recommend one book, podcast, experience for something to read or do, that would be the most impactful thing that they could do in their whole lifetime. So they can only pick one thing that's going to have the most meaningful impact on their life. What would it be and why?
The thing that's coming to mind is Jordan Peterson's first book, 12 Rules for Life. I think, and maybe more geared to men, towards men, but I think for anyone, I've recommended it to plenty of my clients and female friends and stuff like that. But I think it just, in context of this conversation we're having, it just offers a traditional perspective and a more masculine perspective and a permission for, the world to be as it probably naturally wants to be, aside from all of this sort of political rhetoric that we're sort of being forced through, and social media fads, and all of these different ideologies that are coming up at the moment. And I think it just gives a really good structure for living a healthy, free life, and living in a way that is fulfilling. Because I think something I put towards my client recently, which feels relevant now, one of my clients were talking about the idea of, the regrets that she's got throughout her life. And I said, she's not super old or anything, but I said to her, if we all know we're going to have regrets on our deathbed, how do we choose what those regrets are, right? And so I think the faster you can get towards living a fulfilled life that's full of honor and honesty and care and all of those things that you end up beating yourself up for if you violate, the sooner we can get control of that kind of stuff, then the less severe or the less emotionally wounding our regrets are going to be. And I think 12 Rules for Life by Jordan Peterson is a great place to start. Yeah. Okay, great. And if you could only know the absolute truth to one question, what would it be? Oh, are aliens real? What do you think? I think they are. Scientifically, I think probability tells me if the galaxy's as big as everybody says, or the universe, then it's highly unlikely that we're the only ones. Okay. So Matty, is there anything you're excited about at the moment you'd like to let the listeners in on? Excited about, plugging away with my own podcast, I guess, How to Not Get Sick and Die. Sort of we're about 400 episodes in, which is pretty cool. Our own programs, and I guess excited. I'm really excited to become a father in the next sort of 12 months, which is just going to be a wild ride. So, anyone that's got any health challenges or emotional binge eating kind of stuff, feel free to come and listen to the podcast or check out what we do. Cool. And where can people find you if they're interested? Yeah, so How to Not Get Sick and Die, just on any podcast app or YouTube. And then my website is just mattylansdown.com, so just my name. So just head over there. You can submit an inquiry. You can join in the conversation if you're interested to find out more about what we do. The website's there, the podcast's there. Both of it has everything you might need. And then hopefully we can, jump on a call or end up having a chat and see if we can help. Great. And what is the meaning of life? What is the last question? What is the most important question to all of this? Why are we here? Oh, what a question to finish with. The meaning of life. Why are we all here? I think we're all here to find out that it all doesn't really matter. I think my experience from all of the older men, older women, gurus, wisdom keepers, shamans, is that after every difficult thing, after every hard thing, after every challenge, you realize at some point, it doesn't even matter. Why did I put that much importance on it? And so all of that to say, I think, we spend our entire life realizing that it all doesn't really matter, and we could be, the sooner we can realize that, the freer we can be, the happier we can be. And then eventually, we die and nobody even knows we existed 10 years later. It's kind
kind of bleak but freeing at the same time, isn't it?
Yep.
Oh, Matty, thank you for your time. Thank you for your energy. I really appreciated you coming on the podcast.
Yeah, thanks, man. It's been good. Good conversation, and I love all the sort of random tangents and topics we hit.
It's my ADHD. I can't help it.
Awesome, man. But thanks for having me here.
But of course. And look, if anyone's made it here to the end, I would love if you could give us a subscribe, give the podcast a rating, let us know your thoughts in the Q&A on Spotify and any comments on YouTube, as I'd love to hear from you. Matty, thank you. I'll see you next time.
Thanks, man. Catch you soon.